I knew something was off the second I stepped into the Sunnyvale Estates Community Center and saw the pitcher of lemonade already poured and sweating on the little folding table. Linda Hargrove never poured drinks unless she was about to shove a fine down your throat with a smile so sweet it could rot your teeth. The blinds were half closed, the lights turned to that warm, fake glow setting they think makes everyone feel cooperative, and my chair was angled toward the window like they wanted me boxed in and staring at my own reflection while they worked. Power move. Classic Karen move. The kind that says, we're going to make this look like neighborly hospitality while we quietly bury you in paperwork. I sat down anyway, quiet, steady, hands flat on my knees. For a moment, I just watched her. Linda wore that soft, stretched smile every HOA president keeps in her top drawer next to the pastel color violation notices, the one they pull out when they're about to gut you politely. She slid the single sheet across the table like it was a friendly neighborhood bake sale flyer. Just a quick formality, Mike, she chirped, voice high and light like wind chimes made of broken dreams. This makes it easier for everyone. Looks better for you, too. Voluntary compliance. No messy appeals. No public record of violations. You sign, we drop the citations, and life goes back to perfect lawns and happy barbecues. I didn't blink. I didn't nod. I just read it. A pre-filled voluntary compliance agreement with my name, address, and lot number already typed in bold. Date set for today. The language was so sanitized it smelled like bleach and desperation. I, Michael Reynolds, acknowledge the violations listed below and voluntarily agree to remedy them immediately with no further appeal rights or claims against the Sunnyvale Estates HOA board. Not even a blank space for changes. It was written like the past tense had already happened, like I'd already confessed, and they just needed my signature before the lemonade got warm. I looked down again and saw the faint gray text in the document header. Linda must have printed it straight from the shared Google Drive folder without stripping the comments. She'd forgotten to delete the little yellow bubble that read, "Strongly advise him to sign today. Keeps everything clean before the next board vote." I looked up and smiled just enough to make her lean in like she'd already won the neighborhood trophy. If you're listening right now, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button and smash like. It helps more than you think. And frankly, it keeps stories like this from being quietly buried under layers of HOA minutes. Trust me, the ones who win are the ones who watch closely and document everything. Back to Linda. That lemonade she poured was still beating with condensation. Her hand hovered near the pitcher like she wasn't sure whether to pour me a glass or use it as a prop for her next Oscar-worthy performance of Concerned Neighbor. She thought I'd react. Maybe argue. Maybe beg. Maybe ask why my American flag was suddenly too large and my mailbox paint 3 shades off regulation beige. But I'd spent 8 years reading covenants the way other people read love letters. I knew what not reacting looked like in HOA power plays. It looked like control. So I signed slowly, calmly, one stroke at a time. Not because I agreed, because I understood. Because I already knew what came next. See, I wasn't just any homeowner in Sunnyvale Estates. I was the guy they called when compliance got messy. Late dues, disputed violations, suspicious vendor contracts for the community pool, or God forbid, legal couldn't know about this yet. Panics that always landed on my doorstep when the board needed cleaning without fingerprints. They call me the fixer in whispers at block parties. I kept timelines clean, change logs immaculate. My hand were all over every amendment to the CC and RS since the last big rewrite. Every violation notice, every third-party landscaping audit, every policy tweak tied to our Virginia State HOA statutes. I didn't care about glory. I cared about traceability. Every doc signed, every exception noted, every deviation flagged and filed. Even the quiet ones, especially the quiet ones. And somewhere in that process, they forgot something dangerous. I never stopped documenting. Even when the fires were out, even when they thought the cleanup was done, especially when they tried to shove things under the perfectly manicured rug. Linda used to laugh about it at the annual meeting. "You must sleep with one eye open, Mike," she'd say. joking over lukewarm coffee while I flagged yet another backdated violation notice she'd issued to the widow 3 doors down. I'd laughed too, but she never knew the truth. I didn't sleep much at all, and when I did, I slept like someone who knew where every signature trail ended. That compliance agreement wasn't my ending. It was my receipt. By the next neighborhood email blast, the air in Sunnyvale Estates shifted. Not dramatically, just enough to make the hairs on the back of my neck rise whenever Linda's golf cart cruised past my driveway without her usual fake wave. The language changed first. Suddenly, everything was efficiency-focused, community harmony, cost-conscious enforcement. Cute little euphemisms the board uses before they toss you in the shredder and hand you a complimentary HOA-branded water bottle on the way out. They'd done this dance before. This wasn't my first citation rodeo, just the first time I'd seen them dress it up in pastel PowerPoints with floating buzzwords and fake smiles at the town hall potluck. I didn't need another meeting to know what was coming. My usual board contact, who used to ping me for every policy deviation, every audit exception, went radio silent. No more, "Hey Mike, can you vet this notice language?" texts. I was still getting forwarded violation photos of my own mailbox, still asked to review for accuracy. But the chain of command had developed selective amnesia, like I'd become both necessary and invisible at the same time. Linda's emails got shorter, clipped, no emojis, no warmth. I started noticing calendar holds on the community portal titled things like enforcement review, rule, streamlining, and leadership realignment. The attendees were always the board officers, and this is the part that really rang the bell, outside counsel, not the usual volunteer attorney who lived on Elm Street. Outside counsel means 2 things: plausible deniability and expensive decisions. I wasn't invited to any of them. That was the tell. You don't cut someone like me who knows the covenants inside out. You cut around me, then ask legal to mop it up after the blood dries on the perfectly edged lawn. So I opened the folder I kept stashed on my personal drive, the one I'd started after the last time they tried to shortcut me out of a proper hearing. It had my original purchase covenants, every amendment, clause change logs, and every update I'd ever quietly negotiated into the neighborhood records after the first big rewrite 6 years ago tried to paint my complaints as unneighborly. Not this time. I sat down on my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, poured a glass of unsweetened tea, the kind Linda would never approve because it wasn't community-approved beverage color, and started highlighting. I didn't even flinch when I found it. Page 9, paragraph 4 of the CC and RS. If a homeowner is directed, recommended, or strongly advised by any board member or agent of the association to execute a voluntary compliance agreement without independent written intent predating such recommendation, said agreement shall be reclassified as association-initiated enforcement for purposes of all remedies, including full reimbursement of legal fees, accelerated penalty payments per Schedule A, and prohibition of any fines or liens. Simple, clear, clean. But the kicker, the line 3 paragraphs later, made my coffee go cold. It meant if they tried to encourage me to sign, if they phrased it as a suggestion or implied consequences for not signing, it counted as them starting the war and the penalty clock would start ticking. I read that line 3 times. Let's settle. It was the kind of clause that doesn't mean much until a Karen slides a pre-filled form across the table and says it's better for everyone. Then it's everything. That single paragraph meant the trap she'd set for me had just become the trap she'd set for herself. And I had the photo of her own comment bubble proving the strong advice. Linda thought she was executing a clean enforcement. She didn't realize she'd just lit the match and handed it to the guy holding the gasoline can of 8 years of meticulous records. Monday morning, the neighborhood smelled like fresh-cut grass and cheap printer toner. Both warning signs if you'd lived under HOA rule long enough. I'd barely set my coffee down when Linda's golf cart pulled into my driveway like a pastel tank. All fake sunshine and soft eyes, holding a manila folder like it was a birthday card instead of a second bullet. "Hey neighbor," she sang, voice pitched high enough to shatter the regulation mailbox paint. You have a minute? Just a quick follow-up on that agreement we discussed. I followed her to the community center without a word. She chose the small meeting room at the end of the hall, the one with the frosted glass that didn't quite reach the bottom, like privacy was optional in Sunnyvale Estates. Inside, the lights were dimmed to that warm HOA glow they think calms people down. And on the table sat a single glass of lemonade. Already poured. No ice, no sugar packet, just lukewarm yellow, because Linda didn't know how I took it, because it wasn't for me. It was a stage prop. A piece of theater. Nothing bad, she said too fast, like she was stepping over a tripwire of her own making. Just a quick formality to get the file closed. It's better for everyone. She smiled like she'd practiced in the mirror next to her world's best HOA president mug. Sign this updated version, and honestly, it'll help you down the line. Looks more professional if it's voluntary. I didn't touch the pen. Not yet. I read the new letter line by line. My name already typed. The phrasing so sanitized it felt like it had been run through a corporate dishwasher. I have appreciated my time in Sunnyvale Estates. I am voluntarily complying effective immediately. A compliance I hadn't written. Dated for today. Addressed to no one specific. The HOA version of a muzzle. I could hear Linda breathing shallow and quick like she was bracing for me to fight. But I didn't. I signed. No hesitation, no flourish, no emotion. Just ink to paper the way you'd initial a parking ticket you knew was bogus. Her body physically relaxed. I watched her shoulders drop an inch, maybe two. She exhaled through her nose and smiled wider, like someone who just convinced a deer to walk into the HOA slaughterhouse. That's great, she said. We'll process this today. But she didn't notice what I did next. As she stood up and gathered her papers, I casually slid my phone from my pocket, tilted it ever so slightly, and snapped a photo of the new agreement page, zoomed in on the header. Because what Linda forgot was that Google Docs preserve comments in print view if you don't remove the fields. In the upper right margin, faint but clear as day, were her original notes from the drafting phase. Internal coaching lines, board script snippets, and one standout phrase. Strongly advise him to sign today. Keeps him from dragging this into next quarter's budget. I saved the photo, emailed it to myself with a subject line I'd remember, soft push header-proof. Then I took a slow sip of that lemonade just to give her the illusion she'd won. It was lukewarm and bitter. Perfect. What Linda didn't know was that voluntary compliance agreements, when encouraged, nudged, or strongly advised, aren't voluntary at all. Not in the eyes of the Virginia HOA statutes and our own covenants with defined enforcement terms. Not when there's documentation. She thought she was executing a clean closure. She didn't realize she'd just handed me the digital rope to hang the entire board with. And me? I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to make a scene at the next potluck. My silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. At exactly 4:12 p.m., the silence broke. Not mine. Theirs. The board's outside counsel called Linda. Not a calendar invite. Not a soft Slack ping. A full-throated, cold-as-ice phone call that cut through the community center hallway like a scalpel through perfectly edged sod. I wasn't in the room, but I didn't need to be. The door didn't close all the way. Hadn't for years. And panic makes people raise their voices, especially when they're realizing too late they've stepped in something they can't wipe off with a pastel violation notice and a wellness initiative. 2 board members heard it from their desks. One of them later typed the highlights into a neighborhood signal group chat and sent it my way. No signature, but I knew who it was. Let's just say not everyone on the finance committee loves when the president plays fast and loose with enforcement liabilities they have to answer for in the annual budget. The message just read, legal is in full panic mode. Whatever you did, nice. The call went something like this. Why did you include strongly advise him to sign today in the draft? Silence. Linda didn't know she was supposed to delete the margin notes before printing. Didn't realize version history captures every ghost of a comment, every whispered instruction the board sends back and forth like gossip in the church pews of the community center. That reclassifies this as association-initiated enforcement. The attorney continued, voice clipped. It's documented coercion. You understand that, right? More silence. They always think silence saves them. They forget I'd built my entire homeowner reputation on what silence reveals. That evening, I didn't pour a victory drink or play triumphant music. I just opened my laptop, typed in my credentials, and pulled up the compliance archive I'd quietly backed up to myself over the last few months. Email chains, red lines, policy snapshots, board memos, and, most importantly, every version of the CC and RS from original covenants to last amended clause. I downloaded the entire thread history from the shared HOA Google Drive. Version control is a beautiful thing when you're the only one who treats it like evidence and not just a helpful tool. There was time-stamped, user-tagged, uneditable. Linda had copied the compliance template from a folder titled Enforcement Soft Language, and then line by line stripped out the usual voluntary phrasing. She inserted herself. Looks better for you, and strongly advised him to sign today. The system tagged it to her profile and even included a cheerful comment she'd written in the margins weeks ago. Make sure this one doesn't come back on us like the Q3 flag fiasco. That comment alone was a gift. It implied this wasn't the first time. It wouldn't be the last, but it would be the one that cost them. You don't need to scream when you have the receipts. You don't need to argue when the metadata does it for you. By the time I backed up the files onto 2 external drives, one personal, one for counsel, I could almost feel Linda pacing in her kitchen, replaying the call in her head, wondering if she could fix it with an apology or maybe a quiet board memo to legal. She couldn't. There's no such thing as an off-the-record compliance agreement when you write the record yourself. She tried to do what every HOA president does, keep things soft, unspoken, off paper. But this time they left ink trails, and I was already holding the highlighter. By Tuesday morning, they'd already started rewriting history. I saw it in the access logs on the community portal. Document permissions revoked, folders renamed, internal chat messages disappearing like ghosts in the perfectly trimmed hedges. A digital purge, frantic and late. They were trying to close the barn door after the horse had already filed for protection under state HOA statutes. I wasn't even mad. I was impressed by how fast the board pivoted to their favorite fairy tale. He chose to comply. No harm, no foul, no obligations, just a graceful exit from the violation list. As if I decided to float away mid-quarter with no warning, leaving behind unclaimed appeal rights, an airtight enforcement clause, and 8 years of built-up documentation like breadcrumbs in a forest of HOA signs. But the thing about fairy tales is they don't hold up in audit logs. Linda built that compliance agreement in a shared Google Drive because HOA presidents, no matter how seasoned, love templates. They love clean fonts and pre-approved scripts. They love copy-paste. What they hate, what they always forget, is that shared documents carry memory, not just content, activity, every keystroke, every draft, every hand that touched the file. I opened the document in offline mode. Then I opened the version history. It was like watching a slow confession unfold line by line. The first draft, a shell, standard compliance form. Then Linda added a line, looks better for you. Her username timestamped 8:17 p.m. The night before she called me into that warm-lit theater room. She adjusted the spacing, changed the phrasing from effective end of this month to effective immediately. Then she added a phrase I recognized from an old board exit memo. Compliance is the cleanest option to preserve future neighborly relationships. HOA speak for please don't make us pay you damages. 2 versions later, she pasted a line straight from an internal script identical to wording from a previous enforcement case I'd archived when state regulators flagged it as questionable, encouraging voluntary agreements to reduce payout exposure. They tell on themselves without knowing it. And now, thanks to Google's document retention features, Linda's clean enforcement had more fingerprints than a crime scene on a freshly power washed driveway. You can't undo version history. You can only bury it. And I'd already exhumed it, zipped it, and sent it to my attorney. At 10:23 a.m., I saw legal access the file. At 10:46, they downloaded the history. At 11:02, Linda went dark. No emails, no meetings, not even a passive-aggressive note on my door. Because once legal saw the audit trail, every edit, every word, every change, they couldn't unsee it. And once legal can't unsee something, the board can't pretend it never existed. The original file was labeled Voluntary Compliance. My name, final box checked. But the truth was in the layers beneath, in the change log, in the way she rewrote the ending of a story I never agreed to tell. And while they scrambled to realign their narrative, I reread the clause from the covenants. The one that didn't care how Linda felt or how sweetly she smiled when she slid that paper across the table. It only cared about classification, voluntary or association initiated. That one line in our governing documents didn't need proof of intention. It just needed documentation of pressure. And now, thanks to Linda's shortcuts, I had a digital receipt that screamed it louder than I ever could. She tried to create a clean break. Instead, she gave me a binding one. By 9:07 a.m. Wednesday, the email went out. Board legal looped in finance. Flagged urgent. Subject line. Covenant section 7.4 review required. Inside was my clause. The one they'd all skipped past during the last amendment cycle, because it was tucked beneath landscaping schedules and non-compete wording for vendors. The one Linda forgot about entirely when she poured that fake lemonade and asked me to sign my name under hers. The one they didn't expect I'd enforce because I didn't bark at meetings or throw tantrums when newer residents got their violations overlooked. But that clause, section 7.4b to be exact, had teeth. And now those teeth were in finance's neck. They pulled up the covenants and read the section out loud. Not because they didn't believe it, but because no one wanted to be the first to say it was real. Out loud made it harder to ignore. Should the association initiate enforcement without cause, counsel read, slow and flat, the following shall immediately apply. Accelerated payment of all documented legal fees as detailed in Schedule A. Full vesting of any pending resident claims regardless of calendar eligibility, and an automatic penalty fee of $15,000 should payment fail to be issued within 30 calendar days of execution. No interpretation, no wiggle room, just bullet points. Brutal, binding bullet points. The kind of clause they'd let through years ago because no one expected me to last long enough to use it back when I was a safe, quiet homeowner, too practical, too by the book, too polite to ever weaponize paperwork. But paperwork is patient, and Linda had rushed me. Sign today, not tomorrow. Not when you're ready today. And because I'd signed under that pressure and saved the evidence that it was encouraged, not initiated by me, the 30-day clock was already ticking. Day one had started the moment she slid that paper across the table with a forced smile and a shaky hand. Finance didn't argue. They didn't question. They just sat there, probably blinking at each other in silence, calculating numbers that now had legal deadlines attached. The board had built the trap to skip a payout. They didn't notice the landmine underneath it. By pushing me into voluntary compliance, they triggered every word of that clause. They'd gone too far with the language, too eager with the timing, too clever for their own good. That's the thing with clever. It only works if no one's watching. And I had watched everything. Meanwhile, I was sitting on my porch sipping coffee, the exact shade Linda's rules would have banned, reading emails forwarded from my attorney's assistant with the kind of detachment you feel when a house of pastel-colored cards falls. Slow, then sudden, then over. At 10:22 a.m., my attorney sent me a brief note. Confirmation. Legal acknowledged clause application. Preparing letterhead for reclassification notice. Will copy you when sent. That was the moment it turned. Not when Linda smiled, not when I signed, but when they realized the trap wasn't mine, it was theirs. And I was just the one who read the instructions. Thursday morning the letter went out at 9:01 a.m. Sharp black ink on pristine white, firm as stone. No frills, no monologue, just the law, printed clean on my attorney's letterhead. Polite, lethal. We attached everything. A PDF of the covenants with the relevant clause highlighted in yellow. A direct export of the version history from the compliance doc. Screenshot of the visible margin note. Strongly advise him to sign today. A scan of the signed document with full metadata tags. And just for good measure, the original board script Linda had plagiarized from the email went to 4 people. Lead counsel, deputy treasurer, finance chair, and Linda. CC'd, not blind. I wanted them to see each other, wanted them to feel the collective breath being held. Beneath the closing signature, right below the courtesy line from my attorney, was a single sentence I'd written myself. Please confirm status for payout and claim vesting schedule per terms of association-initiated enforcement. It wasn't a question. It was a fuse. Then we waited. 2 hours and 12 minutes later the reply came. Not from Linda. She'd been smart enough to shut up. Not from the deputy, too exposed. It came from the lead corporate counsel, the one who only signs his name when something is absolutely, undeniably real. Subject: reclassification. Body: reviewed. You are correct. I read it twice. Not because I didn't believe it, but because in that moment the entire balance of power shifted. Linda's story, her fake smile, her helpful language, the friendly trap she tried to wrap in HOA tinsel, was over. Invalidated, legally erased. They couldn't take it back. That one line turned her clean compliance into a formal association-initiated enforcement, which meant my legal fees weren't optional. My pending claims immediately vested, and if they didn't wire the full payout within 30 calendar days, that $15,000 penalty kicked in like a landmine, they'd buried themselves. I didn't respond right away. I let them sit with it. Let them stare at the inbox, wondering what else I'd archived, what else I'd documented, what else they'd overlooked while assuming I'd go quietly. The legal team didn't realize what they'd handed me. Not just a payout, not just claim vesting, leverage. Because from that moment on, they couldn't spin the story. Couldn't hint to future buyers that I'd voluntarily left the good graces of the board. Couldn't whisper off the record that I was resistant to community standards. Their own counsel had written my record for me. Short, careful, binding, and absolutely damning. That's the thing about silence. It makes people underestimate you until the letterhead hits the inbox. The call came Thursday night, late enough to suggest Linda had waited until every other option had failed. Her voice was quieter now, missing that syrupy confidence she used to smear over every awkward HOA moment like it fixed things. We can undo the compliance agreement, she said, as if offering to erase a chalk mark instead of a legal classification. I didn't answer immediately. Let the silence stretch long enough for her to fill it. She did. We could reframe this. Maybe something transitional, a new structure, re-onboarding under a consulting arrangement for the Rules Committee. She was spiraling, stitching together words like a lifeboat that had already hit the ocean floor of state statutes. I didn't yell, didn't sigh, didn't ask why she thought I'd want to crawl back into a system that had just tried to sell my compliance as a discount. I just asked one question. Is legal still standing behind reviewed? You were correct? Her breath caught. I could hear her hand move to cover the receiver, maybe to muffle the panic, maybe to steady herself, but the answer never came. She knew what that line meant. Final. Binding. Irrevocable. We both sat in that silence a moment longer. Her trying to repackage a mistake into an invitation, and me just staring out my window at the streetlight flickering over the empty sidewalk lined with perfectly uniform mailboxes. The next morning the package arrived, neatly wrapped in the sterile language of corporate, sorry, neighborhood, surrender. My full legal reimbursement itemized, my accelerated claim vesting schedule activated. A signature page with checkboxes already filled. And tucked at the bottom under the legal disclaimers, a final paragraph labeled courtesy language. Linda's last little reach for dignity. By signing below, the homeowner agrees to a standard confidentiality understanding regarding internal processes and affirms a spirit of mutual respect and non-disparagement. It wasn't mandatory. It wasn't enforceable. It was a plea, a polite request for silence. I read that line 3 times. Then I picked up the pen and crossed a single diagonal line through the paragraph. No initials, no commentary, just deletion. Because I wasn't signing a rewrite. I wasn't letting them file this under amicable. They tried to erase the truth with a smile. Now they wanted to bury it with a bow. But I signed only what I was obligated to sign, nothing more. Not their version of events, not their clean narrative, and certainly not their comfort. Because I didn't need a podium to win. I didn't need revenge to taste like fire. All I needed was the record. And now they knew exactly who was holding it. The community newsletter dropped on a Wednesday, exactly 31 days after the last courtesy email from Linda hit my inbox and disappeared into my archive folder, like every other bad decision they made. I was on the top deck of the local ferry crossing the river when I saw it. Cold air slicing through my jacket. The skyline of the next town stretched out in that smug, glittering way suburbs have when they think you still care. I didn't. Not anymore. Not really. The newsletter was dull by design. Pages of figures, forecast tables, executive summaries that read like a tranquilizer. But buried in the enforcement notes section beneath the bullet points and legal hedging was the sentence. Just one. Compliance agreement reclassified to association-initiated enforcement due to procedural missteps. I read it once, then again, let the words settle. No emotion, no adjectives, no finger-pointing. But there it was, the quiet confession in official ink, public record, filed with the county, reviewed by attorneys, signed by the treasurer, and now printed into the great American archive of neighborhood accountability. The story Linda tried to tell about a smooth voluntary fix, a willing signature, a mutual parting was now invalid. Rewritten not by me, but by the board itself, submitted under penalty of perjury, and now mailed to every mailbox in Sunnyvale Estates. It wasn't a headline. It wasn't a lawsuit. It was quieter than that. But in my world, that line was the verdict. A friend from the finance committee, one of the few who still knew how to text like a human being, messaged me 2 minutes after the newsletter went live. That one line probably cost the reserve fund $68,000. Hope you're somewhere warm. I sent back a thumbs-up emoji and nothing else. No gloating, no follow-up, just acknowledgement. Let the record speak. I stayed on a ferry a while longer, letting the wind whip across my face. Below deck, a couple was arguing softly in front of snack stand. A man behind me sneezed. Life moved on. But Sunnyvale Estates, they'd spent weeks trying to pretend I'd complied willingly. Now, they were on record, admitting they'd tripped over their own shortcut and handed me everything they thought they'd withheld. It wasn't personal anymore. It was procedural. Paperwork didn't care about neighborhood politics or Linda's whispers. It just did what it always does. It waited. And then, when the time was right, it told the truth, quietly, permanently. And somewhere in the distance, I could already hear the next golf car approaching. But this time the driver would think twice before pouring the lemonade. Because the fixer was still here. Still watching. Still documenting. And the next Karen who tried that trick would learn the same lesson the hard way. In an HOA, the real power isn't the clipboard. It's the receipts.